Good evening. Settle in. Allow your shoulders to soften and let your breathing become slow and easy. Tonight we are going to drift back in time, back to an age long before electric lights and crowded roads, back to the 12th and 13th centuries, when stone walls held in the scent of smoke, when nights were thick with silence, and when certain people moved quietly through shadowed streets with their own private purposes. This is not a story of grand battles or thrilling chases. It is instead a slow wandering, a gentle walk through the daily existence of someone who lived in the hidden layers of medieval life. You might call them an assassin, though the word itself in those times carried more mystery than glamour. They were not always leaping from rooftops or drawing blades in moonlight. More often, they were figures folding themselves into crowds, observing, carrying messages, and surviving through careful steps. You know the weight of silence. Even in the market, with its soft chatter and the occasional call of a vendor, there is a gentleness. You linger by the apothecary's stall where dried herbs hang in bunches, their fragrances mingling in the air, sage, thyme, and something bitter you cannot name. The apothecary, an older woman with deep lines at the corners of her eyes, nods as you approach. She does not ask why you need what you request. A small parcel of ground valerian root wrapped in waxed cloth is exchanged for 2 coins. No words are needed. This is the rhythm of trust in a world where secrets are currency. You carry it back through the lanes, feeling the uneven stones beneath your feet. A dog passes by ribs, faintly visible beneath its matted fur. It glances at you and moves on its claws, tapping softly on the stones. Sometimes in the late afternoon, you sit by the riverbank just beyond the walls. The grass here is coarse, bending in the wind. The water moves slowly, carrying bits of reed and leaf. You watch the reflections bent images of trees, clouds drifting. Nearby, a fisherman mends his net. His hands are calloused, moving steadily, threading the coarse twine with a bone needle. He hums softly a tune without words, a melody older than memory. Evening brings the return to narrow streets. You step into a dim tavern, not for company, but for warmth. The air smells of smoke and weak ale. A single candle burns on each table, wax dripped down to uneven pools. The walls are rough timber, etched with the marks of years. Men speak softly in corners, their words muffled, their eyes darting. You sit apart, sipping slowly from a wooden cup, listening to the scrape of chairs on the floor and the dull thud of boots outside. Night deepens. The streets empty further, leaving only the distant sound of water trickling in the gutters and the occasional creak of wood as the wind shifts. You pass through the alleys once more, taking care where you step. A loose stone here, a hidden dip there, each known to you. Overhead, the rooftops are jagged silhouettes against the starless sky. You pause at a doorway with no sign, only a faint chalk mark near the lintel. A message left, a message taken, nothing spoken. Then you move on the cold air against your face, the sound of your own breathing in the quiet. And so the day closes. You return to your small dwelling, unbar the wooden door, and step inside. The air is still cool. You place the pouch of thread on the table, remove the cloak, and fold it neatly. The knife is set beside the bed, not for threat, but for necessity. You lie down, listening to the soft sigh of the wind through the shutter cracks. The candle sputters once, then fades, leaving only darkness. This is not a life of legend. It is a life lived quietly, carefully among people who never know your name. It is the rhythm of survival in a world of stone and shadow, where each day ends much like the last. In stillness, you rise again in the gray of another morning, though time in this place seems to move in long, gentle circles rather than lines. The chill has deepened overnight, and the thatched roof lets in a faint draft. You feel the stiffness in your hands from the night's cold, and rub them slowly, listening to the sound of your own breath. Outside, faint light seeps through a narrow gap in the shutter, just enough to see the outlines of your few belongings. Before stepping out, you reach for a small leather pouch tucked behind a loose stone in the wall. Inside are tiny things, short slivers of charcoal used for marking a folded scrap of parchment with faint lines of writing and a smooth pebble that you sometimes hold without thinking. These are small comforts in a life that asks you to move lightly, leaving no trace. Outside, the sky is a dim pearl color, the air damp from a night of mist. You step into the street, closing the wooden door softly so the latch doesn't clatter. The smell of bread baking drifts faintly from a building at the corner. You can hear the shuffle of someone sweeping, though you can't see them. A man leads a mule past you, its hooves clopping softly on the stones. The animal's breath steams in the cold air, rising like a faint cloud before fading. You move toward a small courtyard where laundry is strung between two leaning poles. The fabric hangs limp in the damp patches of darker color where they've been mended. A woman stoops by a basin, hands in the water, scrubbing with slow, practiced motions. She looks up once meeting your eyes briefly, then lowers her gaze and keeps working. There is no hurry here, no chatter, only the sound of fabric swished and squeezed, and the faint dripping as water falls back into the basin. Past the courtyard, the street bends, narrowing further. You know these turns well, though to a stranger, they would seem alike, each with walls leaning inward, each with the scent of damp timber and smoke. You step carefully over a puddle and pause near a low door. A boy sits on the step, whittling a piece of wood, with a small blade curls of shavings falling to the ground. He glances at you then, at the knife in your belt, and returns to his work. His expression is calm, neither wary nor friendly, just another face in a town of many. You keep walking until you reach the stone wall that marks the edge of the market square. Here the stones are broader, and in the center stands a weathered well, its wooden frame dark with age. A rope hangs from the pulley, the bucket resting on the ground. An older man hauls it up, slowly, muscles working under the worn fabric of his tunic. Water spills a little over the rim, soaking into the dirt. The air smells of wet stone and the faint sweetness of grain being milled somewhere nearby. As you listen, you may imagine yourself there, not as a hero, not as a villain, but simply as another breathing soul moving in silence among rough walls and lantern-lit passages. You will hear of the quiet labor that filled their days, the careful glances, the bread baked in dim kitchens, and the muted toll of distant bells marking the slow passage of time. Let yourself picture narrow streets paved with uneven stones. Feel the coolness of a night breeze against a woolen hood. Imagine the dim glow of a tallow candle trembling in a draft. Hear the distant clink of a blacksmith's hammer, fading into stillness. These are the soft rhythms we will rest within. In this journey, we will pass through 4 chapters each, a slow, steady immersion. First, we will linger in the daily life of someone who might have moved unseen in the medieval world. We will notice what they ate, how they kept their tools, where they slept, and how the city moved quietly around them. You stop at a stall selling simple tools, wooden handles polished by many hands, iron tips darkened with use. You trace your fingers over a small awl, feeling the smoothness of the wood. The vendor, a thin man with a gray beard, watches without speaking. His eyes are pale but steady. You hand over a coin and he wraps the awl in a strip of old linen. The transaction is quiet, the kind that happens hundreds of times each day without remark. Further along, you notice a group of women sitting on low stools, spinning wool. Their hands move rhythmically, twisting fibers into thread. The sound is soft, a faint rasp as the wool slides through fingers. One hums under her breath, a tune that drifts into the air and lingers. You stand for a moment listening, letting the rhythm of their work slow your own thoughts. By midday, you find yourself near the town's small chapel. Its stone walls are rough-patched with lime wash that has flaked away in places. A wooden door stands slightly ajar, letting a faint shaft of light fall across the threshold. Inside, the air is cool and smells faintly of beeswax and old wood. A single candle burns before a simple altar, its flame trembling slightly in a draught. You sit in a back corner, not for prayer, but for a moment of stillness. The stone bench is cold, but the silence is steady, a soft hum beneath the world's noise. You think about the messages you carry, the errands you perform. They are never dramatic, never urgent in the way stories like to tell. A folded note slipped into a basket of onions, a nod to a man sharpening shears. A word murmured as you pass someone in the narrow street. The work is patient. It demands you pay attention, but not with haste, rather with steady observation, like watching the slow turning of a mill wheel. When you leave the chapel, the sun has shifted, though it remains hidden behind a veil of thin clouds. Shadows stretch across the stones, long and soft-edged. You walk toward the outer edge of town where fields begin. The path is muddy, lined with low hedges, tangled with dead leaves. A farmer bends over, planting winter greens, his hands dark with soil. You pass him without words, and he does not look up. Later, as dusk approaches, you pause near a blacksmith's forge. The air is warmer here, though heavy with the tang of iron and smoke. Sparks occasionally leap from the coals, but they lose their glow almost immediately, falling like faint embers onto the darkened ground. The blacksmith himself is broad-shouldered, his tunic stained from years of labor. He does not hurry. He lifts the hammer, lets it fall, lifts it again. Each strike against the metal is measured not frantic, more like a heartbeat than a roar. Around him are tools hung on rough timber walls, each with its place, each worn smooth by constant handling. You stand in the shadow of the doorway, feeling the weight of the day pressing into your shoulders. A child crouches near the wall, gathering scraps of charcoal that have rolled from the forge, carefully placing them in a small basket. The smith glances at you, once offers the faintest nod, and returns to his work. The sound of iron on iron fades into the slow rhythm of the evening. When you leave, the street feels colder. The light has shifted again, softening into the muted gold of a setting sun, filtered through a low haze. You walk past the butcher's shop, though the smell of meat makes you turn your head slightly. A stray cat crouches nearby, watching tail curled around its thin legs. A woman emerges carrying a bundle wrapped in cloth, her eyes on the ground as she walks quickly toward home. You continue toward the small bridge that crosses the drainage channel running through this part of town. The water is dark, sluggish, carrying bits of straw and fallen leaves. Wooden planks creak underfoot as you cross. On the other side, an older man sits on a low stool, carving small wooden spoons. His movements are slow, almost meditative, the curls of pale wood falling into his lap. He hums softly, not for anyone else, but for himself. Farther on, the street widens slightly into a square, where a few traders have begun packing up their wares. One folds rough wool cloths, stacking them in a wooden chest. Another ties bundles of dried fish with thin strips of reed. A pair of children sit nearby, eating small pieces of bread, their feet swinging above the cobbles. Their quiet laughter drifts across the square like a faint echo softening the edges of the day. Then we will gently step into the life of a particular figure, known in whispered histories, exploring how their path unfolded without haste. After that, we will turn our eyes to the remnants, the worn artifacts, the fading parchments, the symbols etched in stone that scholars sift through today. And finally, we will lift our gaze to the contrasting lives of those in comfort and power, existing in the same time, yet far removed in their quiet luxuries. There is nothing to solve here, no urgency, just a calm window into another time. So settle in, and let us begin. You sit for a while on a low stone ledge, watching as the light fades. There is no rush, no urgent task to pull you away. Instead, there is the simple awareness of the world as it slows, the way voices drop, the way the wind shifts, carrying the faint, distant sound of a bell marking vespers. You rest your hands on your knees, feeling the rough weave of your tunic beneath your fingers. In time, you rise and make your way back through a narrow passage lined with shuttered windows. A lantern flickers in the distance, its light wavering in the breeze. Somewhere, someone coughs softly. A door closes with a muted thud. These sounds are not interruptions, they are part of the slow, constant rhythm of life, here woven into the fabric of every day. When you return to your dwelling, you push the door open gently, careful not to startle anyone inside, though no one waits there. The room is just as you left it. The low bed, the folded blanket, the small table with a wooden bowl and spoon. You light a stub of a candle and set it on the table, watching the wax pool slowly at the base. The flame trembles when the wind seeps through the shutter, but it holds. You eat again, more pottage warmed over a small hearth, the taste simple and familiar. You tear bread into small pieces, dipping it slowly, chewing without thought. Outside, night deepens and the world withdraws into shadow. You hear the faint call of someone in the distance, then silence. A few footsteps on the cobbles, then nothing. Before you lie down, you check the loose floorboard where you keep the few things that matter most. The folded parchment, the charcoal, the tiny pebble that somehow comforts you. You press the board back into place, smoothing the edge with your palm until it looks untouched. You sit on the edge of the bed for a long time, letting your thoughts drift. You think of the streets you walked today, the faces you passed, the rhythm of work and rest and quiet exchange. You think of the way the air smelled by the forge, of the way the candlelight bent shadows across the chapel floor, of the soft scrape of the spoon carver's knife. These are not grand events, but they are what fill the days, what make up a life lived quietly. Lying down, you pull the blanket over your shoulders. The straw mattress shifts beneath you with a soft rustle. You close your eyes and listen. Just listen to the world around you. To the wind outside, to the faint creak of the timbers as the night air cools them, to your own breathing slow and steady. Time moves differently here, stretching thin and soft like the glow of a candle guttering before dawn. And as sleep begins to draw near, there is no need for urgency or fear. The streets outside continue their silent watch. The river still runs beyond the walls. The chapel still holds its candle burning low. In this quiet, you remain unnoticed, part of a world that hums gently, endlessly beyond the telling of stories. The life of someone unseen is not measured in moments of violence or sudden change. It is measured in small gestures, in footsteps taken at dusk, in the weight of a folded note in a sleeve, in the steady pulse of survival. And as you rest, the world keeps turning softly as it always has. Imagine a narrow street in a medieval town, perhaps in the early 13th century. The stones beneath your feet are uneven, set long ago, and never fully leveled. Between the stones, rainwater collects in thin pools that reflect the gray sky above. The air is heavy with the mingled scents of wet earth, distant cooking fires, and the faint, acrid smoke of tallow burning in lanterns. Your dwelling is not grand. Few were. It is a low structure built of timber and wattle plastered with a mixture of clay and straw. The roof is thatched dark with years of weather. Inside, the air is dim, filtered through a single small window, shuttered with wood rather than glass. The floor is packed, earth smoothed by countless steps. A low bed frame of rough planks holds a thin mattress stuffed with straw. A coarse wool blanket patched many times is folded at the foot. As someone who must move quietly in the world, you keep few possessions. A simple knife kept not for fighting, but for cutting bread and trimming cord. A pouch of coarse linen containing a few coins, most worn thin, one clip to lighten its weight. A small vial of oil to keep the blade from rusting. And tucked beneath a loose floorboard, a folded scrap of parchment with carefully written marks. Some code, some names, some dates, ink, faded, but still legible if held near the light. In the mornings you rise before the sun fully climbs. The church bell tolls softly, not for you in particular, but for the townsfolk to begin their day. The air in your room is cool, and when you swing your legs to the floor, you feel the rough chill of packed earth. You pull on a woolen tunic, the threads uneven from hand spinning. Over that, a hooded cloak, dark, not new, its hem fraying. You tie a rope belt at your waist. The knot is simple, quick to loosen if needed. You step outside, and the street greets you in muted colors. Neighbors' doors open slowly. A woman scatters feed for her chickens, the clucking soft and rhythmic. A cart creaks by wooden wheels, groaning as it carries sacks of grain toward the mill. The baker's boy hurries past, clutching a basket of loaves, still warm steam faintly rising in the cool air. Your tasks are simple, though deliberate. To walk without drawing attention. To pause at certain corners where messages might be exchanged, a folded scrap of linen left beneath a stone, a whispered phrase to a man sharpening knives in his stall. These errands are quiet. No one shouts, no one runs. The movement of the day is unhurried, woven into the pattern of ordinary life. You know the alleyways well. There is one narrow as a shoulder's width, where sunlight barely reaches. Moss grows on the damp stones there, and the air smells of wet rope and old wood. You pass through slowly counting your steps. A door half hidden behind a tattered cloth is your destination. Inside, an old man sits on a stool, stitching a tear in his sleeve. He nods but says nothing as you hand him a folded scrap. He tucks it into a small chest and continues sewing. This is the rhythm brief exchanges no unnecessary words. In the market, sound drifts gently, a low hum of voices. Women discuss the price of onions. A man measures out dried peas on a balance scale. There are no bright banners, no loud cries, just the muted tones of daily trade. You stand by a stall selling coarse cloth, fingering a bolt of dark wool. The vendor does not push you, simply watches with patient eyes. You buy a span of thread enough to mend your own cloak. Eating is a simple act. A crust of bread, rough and brown, dipped in a bowl of pottage, a thick soup of barley and cabbage simmered slowly in a blackened pot. The taste is plain, but it fills the stomach. Sometimes a sliver of salted fish is added, lending a sharp tang. There is no rush to the meal. You sit on a low bench in the dim light, listening to the faint creak of the building as the wind moves outside. At night, the streets change. Lamps flicker their flames, small and unsteady. The sky darkens to deep indigo, the stars distant and cold. You walk slowly, hood drawn low, each footstep soft. The city hum is replaced by quieter sounds. A dog's bark far away. The creak of a shutter, closing the wind moving through an empty alley. You feel the rough weave of your cloak against your neck, the weight of the knife at your side, not drawn only there, a tool in a world that can be uncertain. You sleep lightly, not from fear, but from habit. In the small hours, you sometimes wake and hear the faint drip of water from the roof eaves. You hear distant bells tolling the canonical hours, matins, lauds marking time as it has been marked for generations. You turn on your side, pull the blanket close, and let the darkness settle around you. This is the life you live quiet and unnoticed. It is not the grand tale of an assassin leaping across rooftops. It is a life of patience, of moving with the rhythm of the town, of listening more than speaking. A life woven from threads of secrecy and routine. Imagine now, as you rest more deeply, that we step softly into the life of someone whispered about in fragments of medieval records. Not the tales from troubadours that sparkle with invention, but the dim notes on old parchment that speak of a man known only as Rashid al-Din Sinan, called by some the Old Man of the Mountain. He lived in the late 12th century, far from the bustling streets we wandered before. His home was among the crags and folds of the Syrian mountains, in a time when the air itself seemed weighted by dust and quiet expectation. He is often described in later writings as the leader of a sect, a shadowy order. But if you peel back the layers of rumor, what remains is the daily pattern of a man holding a community together, far from the centers of power. Picture his fortress, high on a slope, stones fitted tightly together, pale under the sun, but dark and damp at night. The wind there carries the scent of wild thyme and distant fires. The stew is plain but warm, lentils softened over hours seasoned with salt, and a pinch of ground sumac giving a faint sourness that lingers on the tongue. He eats slowly, savoring each spoonful as though stretching time itself. Outside, the courtyard quiets as the workers finish their day. A woman walks by carrying a woven basket filled with dry sticks for the evening fire. Her shoulders are bent, but her pace is unhurried. A rooster crows again, though the sun is low, its call absorbed by the stone walls. Later, Rashid makes his way to a small terrace carved into the mountainside. From here, the valley below stretches out fields, divided by low stone walls, scattered huts with thin trails of smoke rising from their chimneys. The air is cooler now, and a breeze carries the scent of dust and wild fennel. He leans on the rough parapet, feeling the stone grain beneath his palm. His eyes follow the slow path of a shepherd, leading a few sheep along a narrow track. The sheep move with a rhythm as old as the hills, their bells faintly chiming in the distance. As evening deepens, others gather quietly on the terrace. They sit in a loose circle, passing a simple loaf of barley bread torn into pieces. A clay jug of water moves from hand to hand. Conversation is minimal, occasional remarks about the weather, the state of the lower garden, the need to repair a section of the outer wall before winter rains. Their words are soft, and when they lapse into silence, the quiet feels complete rather than awkward. Among them is an older woman who tends the fortress's hives. She speaks softly about the bees, how they cluster in the combs, how the honey is darker this year, thick with the flavor of mountain herbs. Rashid listens, his gaze on the horizon. Her words weave into the stillness a gentle thread of detail, and when she finishes, there is only the sound of wind sighing through dry grass. At dusk, lanterns are lit one by one along the inner walkways. Their glow is muted, golden against the gray stone. Moths flutter briefly around the flames, then disappear back into shadow. In one corner of the courtyard, a man tunes a small wooden instrument, plucking strings and listening for the right pitch. The notes are low, soft, and spread through the evening like ripples in water. A few others pause to listen, their faces calm, their bodies still. Inside, Rashid prepares a small writing board, laying it across his knees as he sits on the floor. He takes a sharpened reed pen, dips it carefully into ink, and begins copying a verse from memory. His script is deliberate, each stroke of the pen slow, as though setting each word in stone. He pauses often, listening to the sounds beyond the room, the low laughter of men finishing their chores, the distant clatter of a bucket being set down, the wind brushing against the shutters. When the ink runs low, he reaches for a small horn cup and pours just enough to continue. His hand is steady even in his age, though the joints ache in the cool air. On the shelves around him are texts in varying states, some crisp and new, others worn and patched. Each represents hours, days, seasons of quiet work. In this world, knowledge is not abundant. It is something tended carefully, like the gardens on the mountain slopes, A few younger men enter quietly, crouching near the wall. They have come to deliver reports, simple ones, about supplies, about the state of the outer paths, about the arrival of a traveler asking for shelter. Rashid listens, nods, and offers brief instructions. His voice is low, even never raised. When they depart, he returns to his writing as though no interruption had come at all. Later, still long after the sun has dropped behind the mountains and darkness has settled fully, Rashid walks through the inner courtyard. The night air carries the faint scent of pine from distant forests. The fortress is still, save for the occasional shuffle of feet on the watchtower above. He stops near a cistern, kneels, and cups his hands in the cold water, drinking slowly, feeling the chill run through him. He stands and looks up at the stars. Here, far from the cities, they blaze bright, scattered across the blackness like grains of salt. He breathes deeply, filling his lungs with the cool night air. His life, often spoken of in whispers and exaggerations, is in truth a life bound by these rhythms: the rising of the sun, the tending of people and walls, the keeping of quiet vows. It is not a fortress of gleaming banners, but of narrow passages, storerooms of grain, low doorways, and the simple sound of sandals scuffing on stone. In the early morning, Rashid walks the length of the inner courtyard. He wears a robe of coarse wool, dyed in muted colors, brown perhaps, or faded green. Over it is a heavier cloak, the fabric lined against the mountain chill. His steps are deliberate, not hurried. He carries his hands clasped behind his back, fingers brushing together lightly as he moves. The men and women of his small community pass him as they begin their own work. Some carry baskets of olives, others coil ropes for use in the steep gardens carved into the hillside. They nod quietly. Some do not look up at all, focused on their tasks. A boy leads a goat past the well, the animal's hooves clicking against the stone. The sound echoes faintly, then is gone. Inside his chambers, Rashid's desk is a low wooden table, worn smooth at the edges. Inside the fortress sleeps. Children lie curled on mats, their breathing steady. Men and women rest after long days of labor, their tools set neatly aside. The bees in their hives cluster tightly, humming softly in their sleep. And Rashid remains a while longer, walking slowly along the stone corridors, his hand trailing along the rough walls, feeling the permanence of stone against the fleeting nature of life. In this way his days pass, not in sudden leaps of violence, but in the slow weaving of duty and care, of hidden plans folded into the ordinary cadence of daily work. Even those who carried blades in his service did so after seasons of tending gardens, learning patience, and moving through the world without drawing notice. If you close your eyes now, you might hear it, the faint scrape of his reed pen across parchment, the low hum of a tune carried by the wind, the steady rhythm of footsteps on stone stairs. A life not marked by grandeur, but by stillness and quiet resolve. Let that rhythm settle over you as night deepens and the fortress walls hold the cool air and the hush of the mountain. Night deepens in the mountain stronghold, and Rashid al-Din Sinan withdraws to his private chamber. It is not large, not adorned with treasures. The walls are bare stone, and the only furnishings are a low wooden bed, a small chest with iron hinges, and a narrow table holding a clay lamp. The flame burns low, the oil within carefully measured. Shadows waver across the uneven walls, making them appear alive as if the very rock is breathing with the cool night air. He sits cross-legged on a woven mat, a blanket drawn around his shoulders. A thin draft moves through the shutter slats, carrying with it the faint scent of mountain herbs crushed by night creatures as they move unseen. He listens not for danger, but for the simple sounds that mark time here. The occasional low bleat of a goat, the distant shuffle of feet from a sentry. Changing watch, the soft scuff of cloth as someone turns over in sleep. It is in these hours, when the world outside the fortress walls is dark and unknowable, that Rashid reflects. Perhaps he recalls a younger time, before he found his way to these heights, when the world seemed larger and louder. Perhaps he thinks of mentors, now long gone, of lessons given under similar skies. The candlelight flickers, and his thoughts move as slowly as the drifting shadows. He takes a small wooden box from the chest and opens it. Inside are things of no great value to anyone else. A smooth stone from a distant river, a sliver of bone carved with symbols, a few beads strung on a length of worn thread. He lifts them one by one, turning them in his hand, feeling their textures. These are remnants of lives intersected briefly, of journeys taken, of gifts given in silence. He returns them carefully, as though setting them to rest. Elsewhere in the fortress, life continues even in the late hours. A young woman tending the hives works by the glow of a small torch, checking the wooden frames for signs of moisture or mold. Her movements are deliberate, slow, her breath misting in the chill. In the kitchen area, another stirs a pot of thick broth over a low fire, preparing for those who will rise before dawn to take to the fields. The scent of garlic and herbs drifts softly through the passageways. Rashid eventually rises, his knees stiff, and moves to the window slit. The night sky is vast and cold. A single lantern glimmers on the far side of the courtyard, where a watchman stands with his spear, grounded cloak wrapped tightly. Beyond, the mountain slopes vanish into blackness, only their outline visible against the stars. The wind carries a sound that might be the creak of a distant tree, or the cry of some unseen bird. In the fortress library, if one can call the small room, that a younger man sits awake copying lines by lamplight. His head tilts close to the page, eyes narrowing as he forms each letter. Rashid passes silently, pausing in the doorway to watch for a moment. The air smells of ink and wax, and the scratching of the reed pen is steady, soothing. He does not speak, not wishing to disturb the rhythm, but the student glances up briefly and offers a respectful nod before returning to his work. The quiet here is layered like the stones of the fortress itself. Every sound is softened by distance and by the understanding that life in such a place demands patience. There are no sudden cries, no clamor of metal on metal, no hurried footfalls. Even the wind seems to move with care, brushing gently against the shutters and the rough stone. On it lie scrolls and folded manuscripts, the ink dark against aged parchment. He reads slowly, tracing lines of Arabic script, with his fingertip the words, not hurried but considered. A clay lamp smokes faintly beside him, casting a dull glow even in daylight. He pauses sometimes, looking out through the narrow window slit to the valley below, where terraces of earth step down toward distant fields. There are stories later told by outsiders that he trained men in secret arts, that he whispered to them and sent them into cities. Perhaps some of that is true. But the life within these walls was not constant intrigue. It was repetition. Morning prayers said softly, meals taken in silence, the tending of gardens on difficult slopes, the sharpening of tools, the mending of robes, the copying of texts. One such day, Rashid walks slowly along the fortress wall. The stones are cold even under the sun. Toward midnight, Rashid walks the inner ramparts again. The stones are cold beneath his sandals, and frost has begun to form in the corners where dew settled earlier. The stars above are countless, unshaken by clouds. He leans against the parapet, looking down at the terraced fields, dark shapes, now but alive with memory. He knows the work that went into each ledge of earth, the hours spent carrying soil and water, the patience of those who tend it. These small details are what hold this place together more than any whispered reputation. Back in his chamber, he lays down on the low bed, pulling the blanket tight. Sleep comes slowly, but he does not chase it. He lets his mind wander through familiar paths, the faces of those in the courtyard, the steady routine of tending bees, the rhythm of hammer on anvil, the soft chant of prayers at dawn. These thoughts are not sharp. They drift like mist, softening the edges of memory. The night stretches long, and in that time, the fortress breathes. Wood creaks softly as it contracts in the cold. A jar settles on a shelf with a muted tap. Somewhere a child whimpers in a dream, then quiets as a mother shifts beside them. These are the sounds that hold the night steady. By the time the horizon begins to pale, Rashid is awake again. He rises before the bell calls the others, washing his hands in a basin of cold water that makes his fingers ache. He dresses slowly, pulling on the same robe, fastening the same belt. The routine itself is an anchor, something constant in a world that changes beyond these walls. He steps outside just as the first calls of birds begin in the scrub below. The sky is the soft gray of early dawn, and the air smells faintly of dew. Men and women begin to emerge from their rooms, some stretching their arms, some already carrying tools. A fire is kindled in the courtyard, the smoke curling into the pale light. Bread is passed around rough and warm, its crust cracking softly as it is torn. Rashid takes his place among them, not apart, not above, but simply present. He accepts a piece of bread, eating slowly as the day begins again. Another day of quiet work, of measured words, of tending and waiting and moving unseen. To those who looked from afar, his life might seem a mystery, full of hidden violence and shadowed deeds. But here within these walls, it is a life woven from ordinary threads, patience, care, and a rhythm that endures beyond any single man. And as you listen, imagine yourself among them. Sitting on a low stone step, bread in hand, watching the sky brighten over the valley. Feeling the rough weave of a cloak around your shoulders, the soft warmth of the bread in your palm, the faint chill of dawn on your skin. There is no need to hurry. There is no need to worry. Time stretches slow and steady as the mountain wind whispers through the narrow streets of stone. He stops to watch as two men patch a section of the parapet, carefully setting each stone, spreading mortar made from lime and sand. Their movements are practiced, steady. One hums a low tune. The sound drifts on the air, mingling with the distant caw of a bird circling above the valley. Rashid descends a narrow stair to the lower courtyard, where women grind grain on stone querns, their arms moving in rhythmic circles. The sound is soft, a steady rasp that blends into the mountain breeze. Nearby, a man pours water from a clay jar into a trough for the animals. The water splashes, darkening the dust where it falls. A child laughs quietly, chasing after a stray chicken that wanders too close to the doorway. In the evenings, he meets with a few trusted companions. They sit cross-legged on woven mats in a small chamber lit by oil lamps. Their conversation is low words measured. Sometimes they discuss messages brought by travelers, reports of distant battles, the shifting of alliances, rumors of crusaders moving through lands far beyond the horizon. Other times they sit in silence, sipping thin tea brewed from herbs gathered on the slopes. It is said that Rashid rarely left his stronghold in his later years, but life within those walls continued each day, marked by simple acts, tending bees in hives tucked against the sun-warmed stone, collecting figs dried carefully for the winter months, scraping soot from lamps so their light might last longer. Nothing here is hurried. Even those who might one day carry out difficult tasks beyond these mountains begin as gardeners, scribes, builders. Their hands are calloused not from blades, but from earth and stone and parchment. As night settles over the mountains, Rashid walks once more along the wall. The air cools quickly, carrying the faint scent of cedar from the distant groves. The valley below darkens shadows, stretching until they blur into the sky. A single lantern glows near the gate, its light steady. From somewhere deeper in the fortress comes the muffled sound of a lute, its melody slow and haunting a tune that drifts and fades before it can be remembered. He stands quietly, breathing in the night air, feeling the rough stone beneath his hand. The fortress is silent except for the faint rustle of wind through dry grass. Time stretches thin here as well. Days pass, seasons change, but the rhythms remain reading, tending, watching, waiting. To outsiders, this place is wrapped in rumor. But within these walls, it is simply life, measured, deliberate, and still. And as you listen, you might picture yourself there, too. Not as someone grand or known, but as one of many moving through the fortress, carrying water, mending a robe, sharing bread in the quiet evening. Life in such a place was not a tale of constant danger. It was more often a tale of patience, of waiting, of the soft, steady hum of existence among stone walls and mountain winds. There is no rush to this memory. Let it linger. Let the quiet of Rashid's world settle over you, like a thin cloak woven from dusk and old stone, and the gentle rhythm of people living unseen. When the sun begins to soften in the late afternoon, Rashid often withdraws from the open courtyards to a shaded room deeper within the stone complex. The walls here are thick, keeping out both heat and cold, and the air carries the faint scent of dried herbs stored in clay jars. A reed mat covers the floor, its fibers rough underfoot, and low wooden shelves hold carefully arranged scrolls, bits of charcoal and small knives for scraping parchment smooth. He sits near a narrow slit of a window where a ribbon of light falls just enough to read by. His eyes are not young, but they move steadily across the words of an older manuscript copied years before by another hand. The script is careful dark lines on pale parchment, words of instruction, prayer, and coded counsel woven together. He turns each page slowly, mindful not to fray the edges. Outside the window, you can hear the faint bleating of goats on the slopes, their calls muffled by distance. A boy, perhaps no more than 12, steps quietly into the room. His bare feet make no sound on the mat. He carries a small bowl of lentil stew steam, curling up and mixing with the faint smell of ink. Rashid nods once in thanks. The boy sets the bowl beside him and withdraws without a word, slipping back through the doorway like a shadow. Time drifts forward as you rest, and now we leave the living mountain stronghold and step softly into the hands of those who came after. Centuries have passed. The fortress walls are ruins now, their sharp edges worn by wind and rain. Yet certain stones remain still fitted together, still bearing the marks of those careful hands long ago. When we think of those who lived in secrecy, we imagine shadows and blades. But what remains to us are these quieter echoes, a groove in a step where feet passed often, a scrap of writing preserved by chance, a tool whose use is now unknown. These remnants speak softly without urgency, and in listening to them we feel the slow pace of time itself. In a monastery library far from those mountains, a monk in the 14th century once copied accounts of travelers. His hand was steady, his script careful though his own life was. Quiet, tending gardens, chanting prayers, mending sandals. He wrote of distant places, of rumors of men who moved unseen. He did not judge them, he simply recorded. That manuscript rests now on a shelf behind glass, its pages brittle, the ink brown and faded. Yet when the page is turned, the words still whisper. There is a comfort in that knowing that even the most secretive lives leave behind threads. They do not shout. They do not demand attention. They wait quietly for someone to notice them centuries later. If you imagine yourself now not as an assassin or a watcher, but as one of those careful hands brushing soil from a stone, feel the calm patience of the task. The sun is warm on your back. The ground is cool beneath your knees. Each movement is deliberate, each discovery placed gently in a box. Time slows to the rhythm of breath and brush stroke. The distant sound of a shepherd's flute drifts over the fields, low and mournful, blending with the rustle of dry grass. When evening comes to the excavation site, tools are laid down quietly. A cloth covers the open trench. Lanterns are lit, their glow soft and golden. The team gathers for a simple meal: bread, olives, a few dried figs. They speak in low voices, sharing observations, not conclusions. There is no rush to solve the puzzle. The puzzle itself is enough. They rest knowing that tomorrow will bring more of the same, the gentle uncovering of lives lived long ago. As night falls, the valley becomes still again. Stars pierce the darkness. The ruins are silent, their stones cooling in the night air. And somewhere in a museum under low light, a small blade and a handful of coins continue to wait, their stories unspoken but present. Let that stillness settle over you. Let the weight of centuries press softly like a blanket. There is no need to know every answer. There is no need to see the whole picture. There is only the gentle rhythm of discovery, the slow, patient hands of time, revealing small things in their own pace. Far to the north, beyond valleys and seas, scholars in a dim room turn over small boxes brought from distant excavations. The lids lift with soft hinges, and inside lie objects wrapped in linen. A fragment of bone carved with careful marks. A ring of simple iron warped by centuries of rust. A scrap of parchment so thin it curls at the edges. They handle each item as though touching time itself. Their movements are slow. Their voices, if they speak, are hushed like those standing in a place of worship. One scholar smooths the parchment gently with his gloved fingertips, tracing the lines of ink. The symbols are faint, drawn by a hand long dead. Some letters are familiar, others seem invented. He copies them carefully into a notebook, dipping his pen into dark ink, forming each line with patience. Outside in the modern city, cars move and people hurry. But in this room, time flows like still water. The ring is lifted from its cloth. It is small, simple, unadorned. Perhaps once it marked a bond, a secret vow, a pledge of loyalty. Perhaps it was lost in a courtyard and buried by years of dust. No one can say. Under the lamp's soft light, its shadow falls onto the white cloth, a perfect circle broken by rust. The scholar replaces it, folding the linen back with steady hands. Elsewhere, an old fortress ruin stands on a hillside, its stones warmed by morning sun. Grass grows between the cracks. Lichens trace pale patterns across the surfaces. Children from a nearby village wander there sometimes, their laughter carrying on the wind. They climb the broken steps, peer through gaps in the walls, touch the cool stone with curious hands. They do not know the names once spoken here. They only know the way the wind sounds when it passes through empty windows. Imagine standing in that valley on a still day. The air is dry, carrying the faint scent of sun-warmed earth and time. All around you, fragments of carved stone lie half buried in soil. A broken stair juts from the hillside, leading nowhere. What once was a tower is now a low mound covered in wild grass. Archaeologists kneel in the dirt, brushing dust from an old threshold, their hands moving slowly, carefully. The sound of the brush is soft, rhythmic, like distant rain. In the shadow of one wall lies a stone trough. Once it may have held water for animals, or been used to soak hemp. Now it holds only leaves, and a shallow puddle from last night's rain. The reflection trembles as a breeze ripples the surface. Above, a bird circles its wings dark against the pale sky. Time feels thick here, layered like the soil that covers lost things. A traveler curious and unhurried moves slowly through the site. He bends to pick up a shard of pottery, its curve smooth in his palm. The glaze is a dull brown, the design almost faded, but a faint swirl remains. He sets it back down, unwilling to disturb its place. Instead, he sits on a stone ledge and lets the sun warm his shoulders, listening to the distant sound of sheep bells and the low hum of insects in the grass. In another part of the world, far from the mountains, a collection of old manuscripts sits in the quiet of a monastery. The shelves are dark wood polished by centuries of use. The air smells of wax and old paper. A monk, no longer young, his back bent slightly, slides one book from its place and opens it on a wooden stand. The script is in Latin, the letters neat and deliberate. He traces the faded ink with his eyes, reading aloud in a soft voice. The words tell of faraway lands of rumors brought by travelers of a hidden fortress in the east of men who moved like shadows of secrets kept through generations. The monk pauses, dipping his quill into ink to make a careful note in the margin. He writes not for excitement or fame, but to preserve the whisper of a story before it fades. Outside, bells ring the hour. He does not hurry. He finishes the line, closes the book, and replaces it on the shelf with reverence. These quiet efforts, the brushing of dust from stone, the copying of faded letters, are how history breathes, not through grand proclamations, but through the patient hands of those who listen to the past without forcing it to speak louder than it can. And the past, in return, offers small tokens, a carved fragment, a lingering melody in a half-remembered song, a symbol etched in the corner of a page. You might imagine yourself in one of these places, kneeling in the dirt with a small trowel brushing soil from a shard of bone. The sun warms your back, and the breeze carries the smell of dry grass and earth. Your breath is steady. Each sweep of the brush reveals another line, another curve, a little more of what once was. Around you, others work in silence, each absorbed in their careful task. Later, you sit with them under the shade of a fig tree. The meal is simple bread torn by hand, a handful of olives, a cup of cool water drawn from a nearby well. Conversation is soft, unhurried. Someone mentions a new find, a fragment of carved wood that might once have been part of a door. Another wonders aloud about the meaning of a symbol on a stone. No one presses for answers. The questions are enough. Evening draws in and lanterns are lit. Their glow pools gently on the ground, illuminating tools set in careful rows, notebooks filled with precise sketches and notes. A moth flutters around the light, its shadow large on the tent wall, then disappears into darkness. You close your eyes for a moment, listening to the quiet, the rustle of leaves, the soft murmurs of colleagues packing away supplies, the distant call of a night bird. The world slows. In that slowness, the lives of those who once moved unseen begin to feel closer, not as figures of fear or thrill, but as people who ate bread from rough bowls, who wrote on scraps of parchment, who mended their cloaks by lamplight. The remnants they left are not weapons drawn in secret, but tools worn by use, fragments of walls, pages inked with steady hands. Somewhere in a museum, far from where these items were found, a young student leans over a display case. She studies a tiny clay seal marked with a symbol she does not fully understand. The room is quiet, the air cool. She imagines the hands that once pressed this seal into wax, the moment it was used, the quiet that followed. Her breath fogs the glass for an instant, then clears, leaving the seal resting as it has for centuries. Among the debris, they find small things, a shard of pottery with a thin band of painted red, a rusted hinge that once held a heavy door, a bit of bronze with a worn engraving. Nothing dramatic, nothing gleaming. But each piece is a quiet voice from a life once lived here. A pot that held grain, a hinge that swung open each morning to let in mountain air. A bronze token perhaps held in someone's palm as they stood on these very stones gazing into the valley below. And so these traces endure, not loudly, not vividly, but steadily, like the slow drip of water wearing down stone, like the patient copying of words in a dim room, like the rhythm of brushes against earth as the sun lowers behind distant hills. They speak in whispers, and if you lean close, if you let your mind slow to their pace, you can almost hear them, the echo of lives lived quietly, purposefully, without ever expecting to be remembered. Let that feeling settle over you. The comfort of knowing that even in secrecy, even in shadow, there was bread, baked ink, dried walls, mended gardens tended. Lives layered with ordinary moments that outlast the louder tales. And as you breathe evenly as the night deepens wherever you are, imagine those quiet places where stones hold memory, where pages rest in stillness, where the past waits with gentle patience. In a quiet corner of an old European city, far from mountain strongholds, there is a church whose foundation dates back to the same centuries. Its stone walls are thick and cold to the touch, and the streets around it are narrow and winding, much like those the shadowed figures once walked. Beneath the church, through a wooden door, few notice a stairway descends into a crypt. The air grows cooler as you go down, and the light from a lantern casts long shadows against the rough-hewn walls. Here in these still spaces, time gathers. On a simple shelf sit fragments unearthed during repairs years ago. A chipped bowl, a length of iron chain, a carved wooden cross darkened by age. Each carries a story, though none speak. You run your fingers gently along the edge of the bowl. The glaze is smooth in some places, rough in others, worn by hands that used it every day without thinking of who might touch it centuries later. There are inscriptions on some stones, names of those long forgotten, a date scratched in uneven numerals. You trace them slowly, letting the lantern light play across them. The crypt is silent, except for the faint drip of water somewhere deeper in the darkness. That sound, steady and soft, seems older than memory itself. Later above ground, a modern historian walks the same streets with a notebook tucked under her arm. She pauses at the edge of an old wall, running her hand along the surface, feeling the indentations left by masons long gone. A passerby would see nothing remarkable, just an old wall. But she notices a faint carving near the corner, a simple cross beside a line, perhaps a mason's mark, or a sign for someone who would have known its meaning. She sketches it into her book, the pencil moving lightly across the page. The sound is soft, like the hush of leaves in wind. A museum display nearby shows drawings of ancient tools discovered in the same region. Awls, chisels, simple knives used for mending and shaping. The placard notes their date and material, but beyond that, it offers only speculation. Visitors linger, reading in whispers, leaning close to peer at the iron shapes that once fit into calloused hands. The air in the room is still carrying the faint scent of old wood and polished stone. Outside, rain begins to fall lightly on the cobbled street. Drops patter softly on rooftops, on leaves, on the shoulders of those who hurry by with umbrellas. The historian does not hurry. She stands beneath the overhang of an archway, watching the way water gathers in the grooves of the stones. She wonders how many centuries those same grooves have channeled rain, how many unseen feet have passed this very place in silence. In another archive far to the south, a scholar examines a set of wax seals stored in a narrow drawer. Each seal bears an impression, some of birds, some of simple geometric patterns, one with a crescent moon. The wax is cracked, edges chipped, but the marks remain. He lines them carefully on a linen cloth, photographing each one in turn under soft light. The work is unhurried. He pauses often, tilting his head to see better, jotting a note in a steady hand. It is not discovery that excites him, but preservation, the quiet knowledge that these small things might otherwise be forgotten. Through these fragments, you begin to sense a culture, not of loud proclamations, but of subtle signs. A certain fold of a note tucked into a sleeve, a chalk mark left on a stone doorway, a slight change in the pattern of stitches in a cloak's hem that only the right eyes would notice. These small cues carried meaning once, though now they are only suggestions, mysteries without solutions. If you close your eyes and imagine, you can feel the texture of those cues. A a fingertip brushing across rough stone, a glance at a folded piece of parchment bearing faint ink strokes, a soft conversation in a corner of a marketplace. The culture was not recorded in grand chronicles, but in these passing gestures, these unnoticed details, these scholars speak softly as they work. They mark each find note, its position, place it gently in a cloth-lined box. The sun shifts slowly, casting long shadows across the excavation. Nearby, a thin stream trickles over stones, the water carrying specks of mica that glint faintly before settling again. A breeze stirs the grass, and for a moment, you might almost hear the old rhythm's footsteps on stone, the low call of a goat herder, the creak of a gate. As centuries passed, stories layered upon them. Some became legends exaggerated and bright, but under those stories are the quiet truths still sleeping in old walls and half-buried objects. Archaeologists speak of context, the soil, the placement, the depth where a thing is found. In that context lies a rhythm, how people lived, how they moved, how they hid and revealed in equal measure. Picture yourself at the edge of an excavation trench at dusk. The tools are set aside. The day's finds are wrapped carefully stored in crates lined with straw. The air smells of earth and faint rain. Lanterns glow softly, casting circles of light on the ground. A cool breeze moves through the grass, carrying with it the distant sound of church bells. You breathe in slowly, feeling the weight of the day fade from your shoulders. Around you, others sit quietly, resting from hours of bending and brushing and thinking. There is no chatter, only the soft sound of pages turning as notes are reviewed. Night deepens and the sight lies quiet. The stars emerge one by one above the dark hills. The ruins sleep again, holding their secrets close. And in the museums and archives, those secrets rest as well in boxes and on shelves, waiting for the next patient hand, the next gentle question. Through all of this, a feeling remains that the past is not lost, but softly woven into the world around us. A stone here, a carving there, a name faintly written on brittle parchment. The lives once lived, hidden, careful, quiet, still hum beneath the noise of the present. To hear them, you need only slow your breath, let your thoughts drift, and imagine the world as it was dimly lit, stone-walled, filled with subtle signs and steady hands. And as you lie there listening, perhaps you feel a kinship with those hands, those eyes that once watched from shadowed corners. They lived without recognition, without drama, yet their world endures in these fragments, these soft echoes. Let that thought cradle you, a quiet reminder that history is not only in battles and bright deeds, but also in the slow, patient work of ordinary days. Far away in a dim archive room, others unroll parchment that has slept in drawers for centuries. The air here is heavy with the scent of old paper and beeswax polish. Light falls through narrow windows in dusty shafts. They turn each page with gloved hands, revealing careful calligraphy in faded ink. Some of the words are prayers. Some are lists, grain inventories, names of families, notes on repairs. And in the margins, sometimes a symbol appears. A simple mark, a circle crossed with a line, or a knife etched beside a date. Quiet hints of an order that moved unseen. They do not speculate loudly. They simply record. The page is photographed. The details noted, the parchment placed back into its protective sleeve. Outside the building, a bell tolls the hour, its sound muted by distance, as though from another age. In a small village museum behind glass rests a curved blade. Its handle is wrapped in leather gone dark with time. The iron is pitted, the edge no longer sharp. A small card explains that it was found near a ruined wall, its purpose uncertain. Some say it might have been a tool. Others perhaps imagine a weapon. But no one can be sure. It rests quietly now, illuminated by a single lamp, while visitors step softly through the room, reading placards in hushed voices. On a nearby shelf are coins, thin, uneven discs with barely visible inscriptions. One bears the outline of a tower, another the faint suggestion of a bird in flight. These coins were handled daily, passed from palm to palm, tucked into pouches, spent on bread and cloth. Their value is gone now, but their weight carries history. You can almost feel the texture of their edges, worn smooth by countless fingers. Outside the museum, the wind shifts through an olive grove. The trees are gnarled, their bark rough, their leaves silver green in the pale light. A few stones lie scattered at the base of one tree, carved long ago with patterns now almost erased. Perhaps they were boundary markers, perhaps something else. The mystery remains soft and unanswered, like a question spoken into the night with no reply. Imagine now as your breath slows that you step beyond the narrow alleys and ruined strongholds. You walk up a winding road paved more evenly than the paths below. Ahead rises a manor of pale stone, its windows set high shutters painted in muted colors. It is not a castle of banners and fanfare. It is a place of measured wealth, where the rhythm of life is just as steady as in the hidden quarters, but different in texture and sound. In the village below, lanterns are extinguished one by one. Smoke from chimneys curls upward, then dissolves into the night. The unseen ones, the gardeners, the messengers, the watchers, have also returned to their small rooms, laying aside their cloaks and folding scraps of parchment away. Sleep draws over them all, lord and servant, known and unknown, binding them in the same steady breath of night. You might imagine yourself walking through the manor's hall as the last lamps are dimmed. The air is soft and cool. Your footsteps echo faintly on the stone, but no one stirs. A dog sleeping by the hearth lifts its head for a moment, then settles back down, sighing. Through an open shutter, you hear the faint call of an owl, far off the sound carrying through the stillness. There is no grand drama here, only a contrast in texture. A life of quiet, waiting in shadow, and a life of quiet tending within walls of comfort. Both move to the same ancient rhythms, the tolling of bells, the sowing of fields, the turning of seasons. Both hold moments of stillness. At dusk, both share bread under the same gray skies. In the morning, the manor will stir again. The kitchen will fill with the soft clatter of knives on cutting boards, the scent of herbs crushed for cooking. Servants will sweep the floors, their brooms whispering over the stone. Outside, the gardener will check the frost on the soil, rubbing earth between his fingers to test its dampness. The Lord will rise and look once more from his window, scanning the fields for the slow lines of workers moving to their tasks. And beyond the walls, down in the town's narrow alleys, others will rise too. They will pull on threadbare cloaks, tighten rope belts, and step softly into the mist. They will pass unnoticed through the markets, trade words that mean more than they seem, and continue their quiet work unseen. Two worlds side by side, both subdued, both enduring. As the day begins again, the air is filled with the same steady hum. A forge hammer in the distance, the muffled lowing of cattle, the rustle of grain poured into sacks. Whether in manor or alley, these sounds weave a constant fabric of life. They are not loud. They do not demand attention. They simply persist like the turning of the earth. Let that thought rest with you now. Let the images of those quiet halls and shadowed courtyards soften into one another. In both there is patience. In both there is care. And in both night falls softly, candlelight flickers low, and people unseen or known lie down to sleep under the same watchful sky. The manor rests quietly through the night, but not all within are asleep. In a small chamber near the kitchens, an older servant sits at a narrow table. A candle flickers, illuminating her lined face as she mends a tear in a linen towel. Her hands are steady, though her movements are slow. The hum of the household has faded, leaving only the occasional pop of embers in the hearth and the distant sigh of wind against the shutters. She pauses to rub her thumb against the coarse fabric, feeling for the edge of the tear. The lantern light turns the cloth a warm honey color, though in daylight it is simple white. Outside the small window, she can hear the trickle of water in the courtyard fountain, steady and unbroken. She resumes her stitching, knotting the thread carefully and smoothing the seam flat with her palm. There is satisfaction in the small repair, something set right, something ready to serve again. Far above her, in a room where the ceiling beams are carved and the shutters are fitted more tightly, a young nobleman sits awake. He is not reading. Instead, he gazes at a small wooden box in his hands. It contains rings and trinkets, pieces passed down through generations. He takes one ring out, turning it between his fingers, tracing the worn engraving. Perhaps he wonders who wore it before him, what vows it sealed, what lives it witnessed. The candlelight catches the dull glint of metal, then fades as he places it back and closes the lid with a soft click. Outside, the fields lie still, the crops cut low after harvest leave stubble that glints pale in the moonlight. A low mist gathers near the ground, winding between fence posts and hedgerows. In the distance, a dog barks once, then silence settles again. The stars arch overhead, faintly blurred by the mist, and the moon casts a soft glow over the manor roof tiles, making them look like silvered scales. As you approach, you hear the low murmur of servants preparing the courtyard for the evening meal. The sound of water splashing as someone rinses vegetables in a wooden basin. A cart's wheel creaks as it is drawn to the side, its iron rim glistening with a faint trace of mud. A stable boy hums softly, brushing down a patient mule, the animal's ears flicking slowly, tail swishing in rhythm. At the edge of the estate, near a copse of old trees, a charcoal burner tends a slow fire within an earthen mound. A faint wisp of smoke escapes into the night air, carrying with it the scent of burning wood and earth. He crouches, adjusting a vent with a stick, listening for the soft sigh of air through the coals. His work is lonely, far from the manor lights, yet he hums softly to himself, the tune simple and steady. Sparks glow deep within the mound, a small heartbeat in the dark. As dawn approaches, the manor's rhythm begins again. A rooster crows from somewhere near the stables. In the servants' quarters, soft footsteps move about, a cough here, a quiet murmur there. The kitchen fire is rekindled embers glowing brighter as fresh wood is added. Soon, the smell of baking bread begins to drift through the corridors, warm and familiar. Water splashes as someone washes greens in a basin, the sound gentle and constant. The Lord rises, wrapping himself in a robe lined with wool. He stands by his window, looking out at the pale light creeping across the fields. He sees the movement of workers arriving with tools slung over their shoulders, their shapes dark against the mist. He notices the slow turn of the windmill's blades in the distance, the faint rhythm of the millstone grinding grain. These sights bring a kind of peace, a sense that the world continues steady and sure. Meanwhile, down in the town's narrow alleys, those who live less openly begin their day as well. A hooded figure walks along the edge of a market square, passing unnoticed among early risers setting up their wares. The air is cool and damp, the cobblestones slick with dew. He stops briefly by a stall selling onions fingers, brushing the edge of a basket as he slips a folded scrap of parchment underneath. The vendor, a woman with hair tucked into a faded scarf, does not look up, but later she will find the note and know what it means. A few streets away, another figure lingers near a well drawing water slowly. His hands are rough, his cloak patched at the shoulders. To anyone passing, he is only another villager. But his eyes watch carefully, noting who enters which doorway, who speaks briefly before moving on. His manner is calm, his presence unremarkable. Yet his quiet task binds him to others unseen, and so the contrast continues. In the manor, bread is sliced onto pewter plates. A servant carries a jug of watered wine, pouring carefully into cups carved with subtle patterns. In the alley, bread of coarser grain is torn by hand, eaten, while walking crumbs falling onto the stones. Both break their fast, both step into a day filled with duties and unspoken hopes. The difference lies not in the rhythm, but in the texture, in the materials, in the space between. Later in the day, the manor courtyard hums softly with work. A cooper shapes staves for a barrel, his mallet tapping gently, each strike precise. A boy sweeps fallen leaves into a pile, pausing to watch a bird hop along the stones. The gardener checks the roots of a young tree, pressing soil around it with careful hands. Their movements are steady, unhurried, the sort of labor that does not draw notice, but sustains everything. In the alley below the town walls, other hands are at work. A man sharpens a blade, not for display, but for necessity. A woman mends the lining of a hood by the light of a small window. Children carry buckets of water from a public well, their chatter low, their feet splashing in shallow puddles. The day moves on filled with these small, quiet acts that keep life moving forward. As evening comes once more, lanterns are lit in both worlds. In the manor, their glow falls on tapestries depicting long-ago hunts and distant saints. In the alleys, the light from tallow lamps spills across rough walls, highlighting faded graffiti and old chalk marks. In both places, people gather, some around a long table, some in a cramped room with only a single stool. They speak in low tones, share what they have, then prepare for rest. Night falls again, and with it, a stillness that settles over roof tiles and thatched eaves alike. The same wind moves through the fields and the alleyways. The same moonlight touches both the manor courtyard and the narrow passage behind the tanner's shop. And under that same sky, the lives of the seen and the unseen, the wealthy and the hidden fold gently into sleep. Inside the hall, the air is warmer, scented faintly with herbs hung in bundles from the beams. The floors paved with broad stones worn smooth by years of steps. Along one wall stands a long table covered in a heavy cloth, the weave dense and simple, but dyed a gentle blue. Pewter plates catch the dim light of oil lamps, their surfaces dull, bearing scratches from countless meals. At each place rests a wooden spoon, the handles carved with subtle designs, leaves, vines, a star. If you close your eyes now, you might hear them together. The faint scrape of a quill on parchment in a manor study, and the soft brush of charcoal across a wall in a shadowed room. The sound of grain poured into a fine jar, and the sound of water poured into a clay pot by lamplight. These sounds merge soft and low into the timeless hum of life itself. Let yourself rest in that thought. Let the layers of history, of contrast, of quiet endurance settle like dust on old stone. There is no rush to reach the end. There is only the rhythm of people living side by side, separated by walls, but bound by the same night air, the same slow heartbeat of a world turning softly beneath the stars. Night continues its slow passage over both worlds. In the manor, the household is asleep, yet one or two embers still glow in the kitchen hearth, giving off a faint, comforting warmth. The scent of baked bread lingers in the air, mingling with the earthy fragrance of herbs stored in clay jars along the shelves. A cat curls in the corner, tail wrapped around itself, breathing steadily in the dark. In the town below, the alleys are hushed. A stray dog pads softly through puddles, left by an earlier rain nose to the ground, then settles near a doorway to rest. Behind shuttered windows, figures shift under woolen blankets, dreams weaving quietly through their minds. Even those who live unseen, those who carry whispered messages and walk narrow paths, allow themselves these hours of stillness. There is a deep, steady calm that wraps the town and the manor alike, as though the earth itself exhales. Hours pass. The moon glides slowly across the sky, silver light touching the uneven rooftops, the tilled fields, the towers and chimneys. Shadows lengthen, shift, and fade. A wind stirs, carrying the smell of damp earth and distant fires. Far out in the fields, an owl calls its voice low, and haunting, then is silent again. In the earliest hours before dawn, some rise quietly to their work. In the manor's bakehouse, a man stokes the coals, coaxing them back to life, the faint glow spreading slowly. He kneads dough in a wide wooden trough, the rhythm steady palms, pressing and folding, pressing and folding. He hums softly a tune known only to him as the dough takes shape beneath his hands. Outside, the first birds begin their calls, thin and tentative, at first, then growing. At the same hour, in a narrow back room of the town, another figure rises. He pulls on his cloak, the fabric still damp in places from the previous night's mist. He tightens the belt and checks the small pouch of coins, fingers counting without looking. He steps outside, closing the door softly, and walks into the still dark alley. His boots make little sound on the stones worn smooth by generations. Ahead, a lantern flickers in a window, and the faint smell of wood smoke drifts down. Both step into their tasks without haste. One needs bread-shaping nourishment for others. One moves through the city, tending to errands unseen by most. Their purposes differ, yet both are bound by the same gentle pull of dawn, by the same awareness of time, slipping forward with each breath. As daylight spreads, the manor courtyard begins to stir. A groom leads horses to the trough, the animals snorting softly, their breath white in the chill air. A dairymaid carries a pail, the faint sound of liquid sloshing as she walks. The master of the house appears briefly on a balcony robe, pulled tight, surveying the land. His face is calm, marked by years of routine eyes, tracing the lines of field and forest he has known since youth. Beyond the walls, in the quieter streets, a hooded figure exchanges a glance with a stallholder. A folded scrap changes hands with no word spoken, tucked away among sprigs of thyme and sage. The stallholder's eyes return to her wares, but her heart beats a little faster for a moment, then steadies as she wipes her hands on her apron. Around them, life continues. A cart rattles over cobblestones. A rooster crows again. A child runs after a ball of twine that slipped from her grasp. Further afield, the river glints under the rising sun. A ferryman pulls his craft across the calm water, the ripples spreading slowly, softly. A nobleman's messenger waits at the far bank, wrapped in a fine cloak, boots polished horse reins in hand. On the near bank, a common man waits, as well, cloak-patched boots scuffed, holding a wrapped bundle. They do not speak. The ferry carries them both side by side, across the same water, under the same pale sky. The lord of this manor moves slowly through the space, his robes of heavier wool lined with fur against the evening chill. He pauses by a window, gazing out at the fields, stretching beyond dark lines against the pale dusk. He is not young, his beard streaked with gray, his hands clasped behind his back as he watches laborers finish their work. Down below, they carry tools to a shed, stack bundles of kindling, and tend the small fires near their cottages. Their voices are low, almost lost in the growing quiet. Later in the day, the manor hall is filled with the quiet hum of midday tasks. Papers are spread on a table, a steward reading accounts aloud in a measured voice, while the lord listens, nodding occasionally, making notes with a quill. Outside, the tall window fields sway gently in the breeze, their muted greens and browns stretching to the horizon. There is no rush, only the soft rhythm of words and ink and thought. At that same hour, down in the market quarter, another figure sits on a bench outside a workshop. He sharpens a tool slowly on a whetstone, the rasping sound steady, almost meditative. A passerby would see only a craftsman, but his eyes flick to the street corner, often noting who comes and goes. The stone in his hands becomes smoother, the tool sharper, but his presence remains quiet, unremarkable, blending into the fabric of the day. Evening descends gently once more. The manor kitchen fills with the aroma of stew, simmering in a large iron pot, rosemary and garlic rising with the steam. Servants move softly, laying the table, as they did yesterday and will tomorrow. Outside, the lanterns are lit one by one, their glow catching on the window panes and turning them golden in the dusk. In the alleyways, similar lights flicker small tallow candles placed in iron sconces, their smoke curling upward. A woman closes her shutter against the night, the wood creaking softly. A man pulls his hood tighter, stepping into a narrow lane that disappears into shadow. Overhead, the first stars begin to appear faint pinpricks in the deepening blue. The two worlds, so different in wealth and comfort, share this same nightfall. They share the same cool air settling over rooftops, the same sound of distant bells marking the hour, the same sense of another day's work concluded. Inside both manor and humble room, blankets are drawn cloaks, folded small belongings set aside. The hum of the day fades, leaving only the slow breathing of those who rest. And as you imagine these places, allow the images to soften in your mind. See the stone walls of the manor and the timber walls of the townhouse blending into one another, both lit by the same quiet glow. Hear the muted voices, the low crackle of fires, the faint tread of feet on stone. Feel the air cool against your skin, carrying the scent of earth and smoke and distant water. In this way, the night joins them. Seen or unseen, noble or humble, each person seeks the same thing. At the end of a day, rest warmth, the soft weight of sleep drawing near. The differences of status, of task, of secrecy fade in the darkness, leaving only human breath and the endless rhythm of night turning toward dawn once again. The meal here is richer than the pottage of the streets, but not extravagant by modern standards. A loaf of fine white bread is cut into thick slices, the crust flaking softly. A bowl of broth rich with herbs and a little meat is set on the table. There is cheese wrapped in cloth, its surface creamy and pale. The servants move carefully, setting each dish in its place, adjusting the cloth, smoothing wrinkles. The Lord and his family sit speaking little, their words measured and calm. The crackle of a fire in the hearth fills the pauses, the flames throwing shadows high on the walls. Beyond these walls, a walled garden shelters rows of herbs and a few fruit trees, their branches bare in the season. The paths are lined with stones, set neatly, and a narrow channel carries water from a cistern. A gardener moves slowly, pruning a dormant vine with a small blade, each cut deliberate. His breath shows in the cool air, and when he stops, he stands for a long moment, listening to the rustle of leaves in the distance. In an upper chamber lit by a single candle, a woman sits with a basket of linen. Her fingers work steadily, stitching a torn seam, the thread moving through the cloth in gentle loops. Outside her window, the town below fades into shadow lanterns, appearing one by one like distant stars. She pauses to stretch her hands, then continues her movements unhurried, her face calm in the candlelight. Though these halls are far removed from the narrow alleys of those unseen lives, the rhythm is not so different. There is the same slow patience, the same care in tending and mending, the same soft awareness of passing time. The difference lies in comfort, thicker blankets, finer bread, a steadier store of food. Yet even here life is quiet, enclosed, watched over by stone walls and the slow turning of seasons. Later in the night, the manor quiets further. The servants finish their tasks and retire to their quarters. The hearth burns lower, its glow fading. Outside, frost forms on the window ledges, and the air grows still. The Lord sits alone by the fire for a while, a book resting in his hands, its pages handwritten by some patient scribe. He reads slowly, lips moving faintly, the words known to few. He turns each page with care, then closes the book and sets it aside, staring into the embers as if searching for a memory.